Fairy Dirt by Thomley. Chapter 3. Brynn's weekend was incredibly dull. In fact, the only thing that got her through it at all was the thought of seeing Max at school on Monday. She didn't even know if he liked her the same way that she liked him, but it didn't really matter. She wasn't allowed to date human boys anyway. He was just someone to give her hope, and that was all that was relevant right now. It was enough for her. But today, something was off. Max seemed distant, like he was either mad at her or just avoiding her altogether. She assumed that he must still be mad at her for not joining him at the beach on Friday. He would just have to get over it. She would have very happily gone with him if it would have been a possibility for her. If really given a choice, she would always choose him. Always. No questions about it. So, she did what any non-confrontational girl would do in that situation and tried to stay away from him for the rest of the day until he cooled down. Lunch was boring without him, but she survived. She saw him come into the cafeteria and get a slice of pizza, but didn't see where he went after that. She couldn't keep from gazing around the lunchroom as she ate her turkey and provolone cheese sub sandwich that she brought from home for the majority of the time. He must have gone outside to eat his food. Pretty immature. He kept his nose buried in textbooks during the classes they shared. As soon as class was dismissed, he was a ghost again. And when there were only 10 minutes left in the last period of the day, she was glad that this little game was over. She didn't know what his problem was with any certainty, but she was positive that it would be drama that she didn't want to deal with. She had enough dramatic people around her at home to bring her down. The bell finally rang, and she grabbed her bag and walked into the hallway. She had barely made it out of the classroom when someone lightly grabbed her by the arm. She spun around hurriedly, expecting one of Fiona's cronies to be messing with her, but saw Max standing there holding her in place. It took her by surprise. She hadn't seen him for most of the day, and he didn't talk to her when they were in classes together. She assumed that she was in the clear at this point.
Hey, sorry I've been weird all day. Do you think we could hang out a little before you go home? I'd really like to spend some time with you since we didn't get a chance to hang out on Friday.
His body language was awkward and hard to read. He was definitely avoiding eye contact with her. It wasn't like he had tried to talk to her at all today. Why now? Was he lying to her? If only she had some of that fairy charm right about now. She really didn't know what to think. She did have time, though. Everyone was so impressed that her spell actually worked on Friday that they were all being a bit lax with her training schedule. Scared she was making the wrong decision, but not willing to turn down any alone time with Max, she agreed to hang out. "I can hang for a little bit. What do you want to do?" she asked, trying hard to read his expression. It was no use, though. His face may well have been made of stone. He would make an excellent poker player.
It's such a nice day outside. Why don't we go to the park? I can drive us.
He continued to avoid eye contact with her as he turned and began walking out of school. It was not going unnoticed. Something was definitely off. She followed him out to the parking lot and hopped into his car. There were a few parks close enough to walk to, but he wanted to go to one near his house. She had no objections to that. There were usually less people at that park. It would just mean more alone time with him, and less of a chance of seeing anyone that she knew. Being alone in the park with a human would be a tough one to explain. The drive there was quiet and awkward. Brynn thought that it was mostly in her head, but Max felt the same way. She knew something was wrong with him earlier in the day, and he knew that he did a terrible job of hiding it. She was still mentally obsessing about it in the passenger seat. Nevertheless, she was itching to get outside in the fresh air. The whole ride had been painfully silent, and it took all she had not to jump out of the car the second that they pulled into a parking space. The wheels were almost still moving when she opened her car door. "So, what do you have in mind now that we are here?" she asked, finally breaking the silence.
There is a gazebo close by. Let's go hang out in there.
He still wasn't looking at her. His gaze was fixed to the ground in front of him. Was he guilty of something? They were just friends, so it couldn't be about some sort of betrayal. He owed her nothing. Brynn anxiously followed him to the gazebo and took a seat beside him on one of the inside benches. It was hot outside, but the ceiling fan in the top of the gazebo created a much-needed cool breeze. She would be happy when cooler weather arrived, she thought to herself. She hated to sweat, and with Max there with her, she was very aware of how much she was perspiring. These southern summers could be absolutely brutal.
Look, I brought you here for a reason, Brynn.
Max said abruptly, finally making eye contact with her. He was nervous, but he told himself to just get over it and do what he was there to do. Putting it off was only making the anxiety build up inside of him. Her heart, as well as her mind, began to race. She felt the blood drain out of her face, and he paused a moment before speaking again. She had to be as white as a ghost right now. He chuckled for a second, then rubbed his hands on his face and through his hair. He was nervous.
This is completely ridiculous, and I can't even believe I'm saying it out loud. Whatever, I'm just gonna get if off my chest, and then we can have a laugh about it or something.
He made a long sigh that sounded like a mix of nervousness and exasperation.
I really can't believe I'm saying this. Brynn, I know what you are.
Panic. Those were the words she had always dreaded hearing, and she didn't know what to do now that she actually was. She felt like her heart was going to beat out of her chest entirely. Everything was starting to spin. She knew what he had to be talking about. She was a fairy. There wasn't any other big secret that she was hiding. She couldn't confess anything, though. What if she was wrong? Maybe he was playing some sort of stupid joke. She couldn't risk the punishment she'd receive just because she was being paranoid. That would look great. Throwing out an "I'm a fairy" confession when he was planning on saying "you're a great friend" would be more than a misstep. What are you talking about? She tried to chuckle, hoping to laugh it off, but failed miserably in her attempt. If anyone was acting guilty of something, it was definitely her at this point. She made a mental note to never play poker.
I followed you home on Friday. I didn't believe the bullshit reason you gave me for not being able to go to the beach. Something just told me you were lying to me. I just knew it. I wanted to know what the truth was. So I went to your house and snuck around the guards. You were never going to tell me the truth. That was the only way I was going to find out. I watched you and the others through a crack in the fence.
What do you think you saw? She asked quietly, still not wanting to accept the fact that her worst fear was being confirmed, but knowing exactly what he had to have seen. She chose her wording carefully. Asking what he thought he saw left a possibility that he was wrong.
I saw you cast spells or something. I saw your sister shrink down to a ridiculously small size and fly around. Brynn, I saw you riding a unicorn. A unicorn. Do you know how ridiculous this is to say out loud? I feel like I'm stuck in some crazy far-out-there sci-fi movie. How does this make any sense?
His voice was beginning to get a bit loud. Frantic, even. It was a good thing the park was so empty. She didn't even have a response. There was nothing that she could say to make it seem better than it was, and she couldn't deny the things that he had seen. It all happened on Friday, just like he said. How was she going to convince him that he didn't see what he clearly had?
You are a fairy or something, right? That is the only thing that somehow makes sense.
He laughed in his head at his statement. How could that possibly make sense? He started rubbing his face again. He felt like he was stuck in a weird dream. These types of things weren't supposed to be real. Yes, I am a fairy. Her response was so quiet it could barely qualify as a whisper. She decided that her only option was to fess up. What else could she do at this point? She would lose him otherwise. That couldn't happen. Please don't let this backfire. My family comes from a very long line of fair folk. We let people talk about us being religious to hide the bigger truth, because it is dangerous for people to know about us and what we are. She was still talking quietly and still hadn't made eye contact with him. She felt more like an outcast than ever before right now.
So what does that entail? Do you fly around tricking people and stealing babies? That's what I read online when I typed the word fairy into a search engine.
Brynn laughed out loud, thankful for Max's sense of humor and naivety. It broke up the awkwardness a bit. That is what folklore nonsense is made of. Yes, we are magical and by nature a bit mischievous, but most of what you read online is untrue. Humans have quite active imaginations, it turns out. A simple thought or suggestion from someone can turn into cold, hard fact in the blink of an eye as far as most are concerned. Max was silent a moment, trying to take it all in. It was one thing to think that Brynn was a fairy, but it was quite another to hear her admit it. A few days ago, he didn't think anything like this even existed.
How do you become a fairy? I assume you were born into it, but how did you guys even come to be?
The legends say that our race was once angels. They were cast out of the heavens for not being pure enough. They weren't evil enough for hell, so they were left to roam the earth.
So can you die or are you immortal? Do you age like humans or faster? Wait, are you really 18? Like a human kind of 18.
First of all, I'm not a secret old lady or something. I really am 18, as in I have only been alive for 18 years. And yes, we can die. We do typically have longer lifespans than humans, though.
I can't lie.
Max began.
This is all a bit overwhelming. Last week I thought you were just an ordinary girl with a big group of weird, bitchy relatives. Maybe even like a rebel agnostic in a family of a strict religion or something. Not this, though.
Please, promise me you won't tell anyone what you know. Brynn began to cry. For the first time in her life, she was scared about her family's secret getting out. She had never understood the seriousness of it all until right now. There could be real and harsh consequences for both of them. It was hitting her like a ton of bricks. How could she be so naive?
I won't say anything to anybody, Brynn. You should know that. Come on. Just don't lie to me about anything else, please. I really like you a lot. You can trust me, and I'd like to think that I could trust you as well.
No lies, I promise, Brynn said as she tried to wipe the tears from her eyes. She was a bit embarrassed that she had let herself get so emotional. How was it possible that he was being so cool about all of this? Most people would be running for the hills right now. She wasn't even going into the details about not being able to tell him a lie. He didn't need all of the fairy particulars right now.
A fairy girlfriend I can deal with, but not a liar.
Girlfriend? She smiled as Max reached for her hand and held it in his. What was happening right now? He was more upset that she hadn't been upfront with him than he was about her being a fairy. This had been a total emotional roller coaster. Her heart skipped at the thought of being his girlfriend, though. It was highly illegal in the fairy realm, but it made her so happy at the moment. He was all that she had been desiring since he entered her life, not just because he was nice to look at either. He was smart, intriguing, and different than the other humans. He had a beautiful mind. Right now she felt like Eve, and he was a juicy, honey-crisp apple. He was all that she wanted, forbidden or not. They sat in silence for a little while. He was content just sitting there with Brynn's head on his shoulder. They had both been wanting this for so long. Neither of them even realized the feeling was mutual until today. The circumstances that made it happen were unexpected for sure, but they were happy now. She didn't want the moment to end, but she knew her mom would have it in for her if she stayed out for much longer. It could pique someone's interest for sure. They walked back to Max's car hand in hand. She gave him a hug goodbye and opted to walk home to not raise suspicions. The sun was beginning to set, and the sky was a beautiful mix of pink and orange. The clouds were a bluish shade of purple and looked almost like smoke against the bright sky. The temperature had dropped a bit, but it was still quite balmy. She could smell the fragrant honeysuckles in the bushes lining the sidewalk. This was the kind of evening she would enjoy if she didn't have the fact that she just spilled her family's secret looming over her. She wished she could just soak up the scenery and the thought of her new closeness with Max without having to stress about other things. When she got home, she quickly washed up and joined everyone for dinner. She was completely paranoid through the rest of the night. She sat awkwardly through the meal, worried someone would ask where she had gone after school at any moment. Good thing she was pretty awkward during their conversations already. Maybe no one would notice if she began to stumble over her words. She would have made up a story to cover for what she was doing, but fairies were unable to lie. It would be no use for her to even try. So as soon as she cleared her plate of food, she asked to be excused to go start working on her homework. She had never been so thankful to have assignments to do than she was right now. Making people aware that you were a fairy was a major deal in her world. It is one of the first things fairy children are taught, in fact. If you were caught revealing the truth, you could actually be exiled. They were all told stories when they were younger of times when the cat got out of the bag. If the elders were willing to cut all ties and banish a family member because of it, she shuddered at the thought of what would happen to the commoners that were told about the Fae. They never heard about what happened to them. Common sense just told them that the elders wouldn't stand for someone who knew about them being free to roam around the world, to potentially speak of what they knew. It just wasn't going to happen. That risk was far too large to take. The last fairy to tell the family secret was Brynn's Aunt Madeleine. She wasn't spoken of much, not even by her mother. She didn't know if that was due to sadness or to fear. Madeleine fell in love with a human boy when they were about Brynn's age, and she confessed her heritage to him one night. She thought that it would be okay for him to know about her life because she intended on marrying and starting a family with him. She had dreams that were bigger than the fairy world. That kind of activity with humans was forbidden, though. The elders said they would not tolerate any of her foolish plans, and they took her away in the middle of the night. She was never seen or heard from again. It was almost as if she had never even existed. Brynn learned the story when she was young. It was especially alarming because it happened to someone close to her. She would ask her mother about it from time to time, but she would always change the subject. There were so many unanswered questions. That story was all that Brynn could think about while she was lying in bed that night. Sleep was definitely going to be evading her. She would never be able to forgive herself if something happened to Max because she was careless. It was a matter of being in the wrong place at the wrong time. She was to blame regardless. There is a reason that her kind didn't have human friends, and this was it. She never fully grasped the magnitude of what she was keeping concealed until now. She should have been more careful. Please like and subscribe for more free audiobook content.